Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. With Deontay Wilder claiming some form of leg injury after his fight with Tyson Fury, it made me think not only that was a poor excuse to throw out there at that point, but it made me think about Wilder's career, his age, and injury history, and the fact that if he was injured, if we take it at face value, clearly it led to an underperformance. But it also made me think, have we seen the best of Deontay Wilder? Are injuries, because he has a long injury history, ravaged by injuries, especially to his right arm and hand, is it catching up with him? Is his prime effectively going to be curtailed to some degree by injury? And what I mean by that is Wilder is always a guy who's relied on his athleticism. When people think of him, they think of the right hand, but they don't think of a lot else. But his athleticism is one of the things that has really allowed him to, get out of the way of punches, at a moment's notice, to manage range well, utilize his advantages, the height and reach that he's had over most opponents. And athleticism, his legs in particular, has been key for him to deliver the right hand. So without the delivery system, as it were, if we take him at face value and say that he was injured to some extent and that affected his performance, then he becomes a guy who is much more beatable. In this case against Tyson Fury, and a dominant and rampant Fury, clearly he didn't really stand much of a chance in the end. Fury just was all over him like white on rice. But going forward, and we need to think about this because Wilder is 34, knocking on the door of 35, what impact could this have, one, in a trilogy fight, injury potentially, Deontay Wilder breaking down over time, but for the rest of his career, because he's talked about fighting on to he's about 40, and I think some of that he was imagining in his mind that he was going to be undefeated, 51-0, yada, yada, yada. But with the long injury history, I've always believed that's going to catch up with Deontay Wilder at some point. And if you follow this channel for any length of time, I feel heavyweights do their best work before the age of 35. After that, often heavyweights start to break down, their athleticism starts to go, and their prime slowly fades away. So there is a question to be asked. Have we seen peak prime Deontay Wilder, as it were, come and go? Sometimes fighters, overnight, they can almost look like they've gotten old or lost it. We've seen it time and time again. And that fight, Deontay Wilder, was dreadful. And if injury really was an issue, then the whole injury history and him breaking down, it's actually manifested here and could continue to manifest throughout the remainder of his career. So while I think he thinks he was going to be fighting for another 5 or 6 years, it could be a shortened career, and injury could actually play a part in that. And if he continues to rack up losses, we might see less of Deontay Wilder than he probably originally envisioned. And when you consider Wilder's had 7 surgeries on his arm and hand, that's the right one, just the right one. He's also had this leg issue, which he's now talking about. He was injured in the Dominic Breazeale fight. There was something to do with the left arm or elbow or something like that. It was never fully disclosed, and that was only a round of action. It's not going to get any better, and Father Time is undefeated. And Deontay Wilder doesn't have a style where if his athleticism fades, he can't fall back on his skills. Arguably, guys like Alexander Povetkin and Vladimir Klitschko, who are recent examples of fighters who have been towards 40 years old and had success, arguably their skills, and you can maybe throw Luis Ortiz into the mix, he's still considered a fighter that people think is a top 10 fighter. Same with Povetkin. Vladimir Klitschko obviously had a decent chunk of his reign after the age of 35. But skills pay the bills. They were able to sit back and rely on their skills as their athleticism started to fade. And I've said for a while, Deontay Wilder may find it problematic if his athleticism starts to fade sooner rather than later, because all he has to fall back on is his power. And against Tyson Fury, he couldn't deliver the right hand land flush He's always going to be dangerous, and his power is always going to be the last thing to go compared to, say, his athleticism in general. But if he can't bound across the ring and do things and move the way that he wants to, and if he does have leg issues or whatever, or continued other issues, and he's slowly losing his athleticism, let's face it, as people age, they actually lose a bit of their pace, a bit of, just general all-round athleticism. You're probably going to be jumping and running faster in your 20s than your late 30s. And in the world of professional sport and heavyweight boxing, especially with punches coming at your head, and if you are moving a split second slower, either through your feet, your legs, your head movement, that can make all the difference. So there is a case to actually say, is Deontay Wilder reached the point in his career where injuries are catching up with him to the point where he's a much more beatable fighter than maybe even 6 months ago, a year ago? There is always going to be some sort of tipping point for fighters in their careers. For some fighters, it can happen overnight. Others, it's a gradual decline. It's just something to consider. And if we take Deontay Wilder at face value, he was injured. It impacted his performance. And if that's the case, it obviously helped Fury have a much more easier night than he otherwise may have. But I still think Fury, in that form, with that strategy, he was always going to beat Deontay Wilder. So I'm not trying to take credit away from Tyson Fury. But if we do believe Wilder was hobbled to any extent, even if it was only sort of a slight strain that impacted him to some degree, well, certainly for the rest of his career, it doesn't bode well. If he's breaking down more broadly than his arm and hand, that's bad news for Deontay Wilder. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.